Welcome to this episode of Level with Emily Reese, featuring a conversation with Scientific, also known as Andy Rohrmann, about Oxenfree 2 Lost Signals. This is part one of a two-part conversation where I talk with Andy about both Oxenfree games. Oxenfree, the first, came out in 2016. The second came out in July of this year, 2023. So in part one, we primarily talk about the second game, and we spend a lot of time on the first game in part two of our chat, which you'll hear next week. Both games are coming-of-age stories, full of dialogue between the characters. In the first game, you play as Alex, and she is hanging out on the fictional Edwards Island to party with a bunch of her high school friends, including her best friend Ren, who does come up in the conversation a couple of times. In Oxenfree 2, you're Riley, and Riley is a 20-something who's returned to her hometown in the Pacific Northwest to take a job setting up transmitters along the coast to study radio anomalies. And radio is a huge piece of the Oxenfree puzzle in both games. You carry a portable transistor radio around in the first and second games, and you can listen to music and talk as you move around the landscape. So that gave Andy the chance to write some diegetic music, which is music that, characters can hear. So there's music that you can hear on the radio in addition to the music that you hear as you wander through the games. About that music, Andy Rohrmann, Scientific, has my number, and I don't know exactly what it is. I have many theories, but I'm very passionate about the music in these games, and you won't hear that in this YouTube version. We leave music out of the YouTube conversations for copyright reasons. So if you want to hear all this amazing Oxenfree and Oxenfree 2 music, you gotta check out the audio podcast. Andy and I do a good job, I think, of leaving spoilers out for the second game because it's only been out for a few months. The first one, not so much. It's really difficult to talk about the second game without spoiling some aspects of the first game. So if you want to experience both games spoiler-free, I would recommend that you go play them first and then come back to these conversations. Join us on Discord. That link is down in the show notes. Please subscribe to us here on YouTube. You can find us on certain social medias sometimes. And if you can support us financially on Patreon, that would be great. I'll say it again. I love the music in these soundtracks so much. I just loved, and the replayability of the games as well is very high as you uncover more secrets, more dialogue, and in some cases, more audio, more music and sound and audio secrets, which is really fun. So this conversation starts off with me kind of telling Andy that, like, just how much I really loved these games and his music. So here we go. I've been telling everybody about these games that will listen to me, and seriously, I've been looking forward to this, so I just have an excuse to talk about it for a while. They're both just such beautiful games in so many ways. Like, I love the art, I love the music, obviously. The stories are great. They're each gems, and the more time I spent with each of them, because after I finished the second one, I went back and played the first one again. I'm like, well, now I gotta do this again. So I did that, and then I started the second one again, and then I didn't like how I started it, so I started it again. And so technically, this is my third. I'm toward the end. I know of my second full playthrough of the second game, and I was just telling you before I hit record, I feel like I could just spend weeks and weeks on both of these games, and I would still be finding connections that I know I'm going to miss all over the place. And so I look forward to you pointing out some of those things for me, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, the ones I remember.
Yeah.
Because I'm the same way. Like, I think just the way these games have developed, it's so much like, we could throw this idea in, and mostly musically, but just ideas, and then they aren't necessarily like part of the script. So then I kind of forget.
Sure.
There's a lot of, I guess, deep lore, and enough of so much of it that somebody can bring something up, and I'm like, I don't know what that is, and then I think about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, forgot we did that.
Yeah, and there's so many different uses of music in the game too, which is really fun.
Yeah.
on top of all of that, you did the sound too in both of these games, right? The first and second.
I collaborated
Okay.
with a sound designer. So now that I'm audio director for night school, it's a little more supervisory.
Okay.
But to kick off Oxenfree 1, it was just me for the first, I don't know, 6
Okay.
months. So everything from setting ambiences in the various areas of the game to like, squeaky doors and things like that. But then for Oxenfree 1, sound designer named Jason Galati came on and really took over. And so by the end, I was only working on music.
Okay.
And then for Oxenfree 2, we had Rachel Hartanto and Chris Purse, who Chris is now full time with Night School as well. So yeah, a lot of thankful for a lot of help. But yeah, initially kind of like driving the vision and the concept and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I just want to bounce some like from 1 to 2 things that I noticed, and a listener, a patron, Utopia Nemo, also wrote in and asked me to ask you, because it seemed like, and this is my theory, and you can tell me to shut the fuck up anytime. I swear to God, this is your interview. But it's like, I initially thought when I first started playing Oxenfree 2, I was like, this seems more ambient and more background than the music in the first game. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, yes, that's true, but also I feel like the second game is longer. There's more time for ambience. And also it's mixed differently. So it's farther back in the mix, I feel like the music is in Oxenfree 2 compared to the first one. So I just want kind of your reactions to all of those comments. Like the fact that initially Oxenfree 2 seemed less kind of in-your-face melodic, but the more I listened to it, the less I felt that way. I thought, no, there's still really strong melodic content throughout this whole soundtrack. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on the mix, yes, it's lower and more proper. Oxenfree 1, it was just a little scrappier and it's a little loud to the point where I think some people have complained.
Did they?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's one of the things. It's like tough to be my own judge on mix and things like that. I tend to go lower, I think, with music volume. So yeah, we just kind of learned from the first one. So that's on the technical side. That's that. Creatively, I think just fortunately, based on how Oxenfree 1 starts, we just started with some like more in-your-face songs up front. To the point where that Epiphany Field song, the Speaking of Deep Lore, that was originally intended as one of Ren's band's like demo songs.
Oh, okay. Ren is one of the main character's friends. Yeah, her best friend.
So it's, at some point we decided that Ren's band would have a song on the radio. And so I wrote 3 things. One of them is the song on the radio that I just sent you over email. And then the other 2 just ended up as part of the score, that they were like, oh, we need something brighter and kind of poppier to open it. Yeah. That was the scene setting there. And so for Oxenfree 2, it's much darker opening and mysterious. We didn't get to jump in like that. And then we never really do. So I think it is moodier overall for sure. Or I would say more grown up, getting to kind of the deeper of like why and how it's written that way is like we're dealing with characters that have moved on or, much later in life or later in life. And so the music's grown up a little as well. Yeah. I think is the way to put it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I need to. It's, but I mean, I did feel like, there are all kinds of times in Oxenfree 2 where there's major tonality, where there's a more uplifting, hopeful sound. There are times and places for that, and we'll talk about some of those in detail. But there's far more of that, I think, in the first game because of those things that you said, the youthfulness, the naivete, the coming of age in a different way than a 20-some-year-old does, right? Like these are high school kids. And so, it really struck me how well, in hindsight, you captured that. I don't know if I would have been able to articulate that unless there had been a second game. You know what I mean? And I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I, too, did not think about it until comparing or working on the second one and really, like, realizing that a lot of what was making Oxenfree was a little more youthful and, more melodic, more rhythmic, and less just, I don't want to say backgroundy, but just less of that, I guess.
Yeah.
With the exception of what kind of had more almost action scenes in Oxenfree 2 that were more overtly and directly scored. So that was a chance to do some more, like, louder stuff, quicker arrangements and whatnot. But for the most part, it was much, much more subdued.
Yeah. And I mean, if it's not clear, I loved them both. I loved the experience of both. And the more secrets I uncover, the more times I want to go back and try again. When I finished the second one and then I started again, didn't like that start over. So I started again. It was like, even the third time starting, I tried to make all the same choices, but it was clear that I hadn't because I was not getting some of the same dialogue later. And I was like, damn it, what did I do wrong, Or just watching other people talk about their experiences and they're like, this scene ends happy. And I'm like, mine didn't. Mine did not end happy at all. And it's just like how, where did I take a different path? And the replayability is so high. I love it. Okay, well, let's stay. Oh God, it's so hard for me. We're probably going to bounce back and forth the whole time. Who am I kidding? But
it fits the games. Time loops.
It does. Lots of time loops. But just to address again the opening of Oxenfree 2, I love the opening. It is much darker. She kind of wakes up on a dock, basically, just like on the ground, and Riley is her name, and I just love how the music carries you through that opening scene, and you're kind of heading toward this lighthouse, just trying to figure out what's going on, and I loved the intensity of the music. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, that piece of music. This is a low-key Easter egg. But that piece of music is essentially a version of something that appeared in Oxenfree 1.
Yeah, okay.
So if you look at all the songs, anything that ends in station is that. So that's Atwater Station, Catbird Station.
Yes.
Pole Station? I don't even remember my own song name. But that was kind of like to tie together this basic melody that was just very useful. Everybody liked and everybody wanted to put all over the place in the game. So in Oxenfree 1, I was like, I should make a different version of it. So I made a different version. And then it appears twice in Oxenfree 2. So it appears there, again in a kind of revised version. And then it appears again at the waterfall with Charlie.
Yes.
But then I was like, all right, now this is the fourth time I've done this. So my little kind of in-joke to myself is that the fourth version is just the other three chopped up and spliced together.
Is that To the Island?
No, this is... Oh. You know what? I don't even remember what I called it.
Okay.
This one, I'll have to look at my own notes.
No, you should. And do it.
Google, no. I think it's something station. I know something station. It is Arcadia Station.
Oh, Arcadia Station. Okay.
So all those names, just so you know, those are all World War II like missions, like secret mission names. Okay. So as a cheat for naming a bunch of stuff that had to do with the Kanaloa, I would just look at like old World War II lists of secret missions they ran in the South Pacific or whatever, and stole names.
Nice.
That's where a ton of these names come from. But anyway, so that Arcadia Station is just the other three stations just chopped up and spliced together.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Because there is a version that you do of that melody from Atwater Station where it's kind of like weirdly major, or you invert some things and you kind of manipulate that melody. That's To the Island. And I love that. And the first time I heard it was on the radio, and then I heard it later, I feel like, in the texture of the game. Is that accurate?
That's highly likely.
Because I do hear others on the radio sometimes too. Yeah.
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 There's so much on the radio
Yeah.
that, and again, like the concept of the game, it's like kind of a free for all. Like we could put score on there because I've played with that so much already. That score and in-game music kind of crossover.
Yeah.
That, like, screw it. The magnetophone puzzles, that's just beach, but in a kind of like a whatever 40s, 30s style.
Mm-hmm.
So we're already self-referencing, so there's no reason, I can't like, oh, just put this on the radio.
Yeah. Yeah. To the Island, that's the one that's like a little inverted, which I liked. Why did you do that to that melody?
I don't know. It just has stuck with, it's so much the game,
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was also, this was the point, we've hinted at chunks of Oxenfree 1 already in Oxenfree 2, but this was like, we're going back to where it all happened. So I knew I needed something evocative there, and I don't know which branch you took, but spoiler alert, one of them is with Jacob and the other is with Alex. Ghost Alex? Phantom?
Yeah.
I moved Alex. So it was definitely, I wanted something that referenced Oxenfree 1. People kind of get that vibe. I tried like, way overt, like just straight up putting full versions of stuff from Oxenfree 1 there. Nothing really quite worked because I realized this is one that had to more tightly score to the moods of the characters.
Okay. Yeah.
But also like reintroduce the island. So to the island. And then once you're at the island, when you're on the docks, that's one that is remixed, manipulated Oxenfree 1 music. Then even when you go to the beach, I think it's Beacon Beach backwards, and so we try to get as much of the original Oxenfree 1 island into the visit in Oxenfree 2 as possible. And again, just that's one of the things I've said about these games is they're not scored to characters as much as they are the environment.
Sure.
So this is the island. Like I've imagined like to the point where it's almost diegetic. Like this is just like what the island sounds like. As part of the ambience is these, chunks of music, radio broadcasts and things. So just trying to be evocative of that in subtle ways to maybe poke some good memories when people get back there. Because I know even, we're showing it the whole game. I think people are like, ooh, we get to go back to Edwards?
Yeah, it is in the background that whole time. And what was that like to revisit some of that stuff? I mean, I'm sure maybe you had, but it seems like some of that music you might not have tinkered with for a while. And then since so much of it does get kind of like remixed, what was that like?
It was a ton of fun. One, I'm a bit obsessive about archives and backups. So going back 6 years, stuff opened right up.
Nice.
There with virtual versions of synthesizers or with just the recordings. So that's kind of one of the first things I did was kind of listen through and then started opening projects for thinking about songs that became most important for people who loved the first game to bring them back or resurrect or remix in some way, even to the point of finding like old versions that I had abandoned. Well, this is really cool. So let me look. I'm looking through the names. Yes, I did call it. So Past Days is a version of Days Past from Oxenfree 1, and it has orchestral elements. And because I had fiddled in the first game with like, oh, what would an orchestral version of this sound like? And then ditched it or only used chunks of it. And so I was like, well, I'm putting it in Oxenfree 2 because it sounds
nice. That's awesome. I imagine we spoke, it was around this time last year. I can't quite remember, but I feel like it was summertime. You must have been working on this then. Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you start working on Oxenfree 2?
That's a good question. Uh, it's been in progress a while. Gonna do, speaking of being organized, and open up a folder and look at the date modified. No, I
Yes.
created and see when the first projects were.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Well, this actually shows some of this how far back I reference. So some of this is Oxenfree 1 stuff. But yeah, it looks like 2019. Like I think it was really leading into pandemic almost.
Oh, okay.
The first fiddling started.
Yeah.
Uh, then off and on, or mostly on, but in different ways for the next, up until it launched. Because beyond the music, we went through so much transition. Night School did that we got uh, extensions. Basically, we got to keep tinkering instead of just having to push it out. So yeah, there was kind of ongoing music work consistently right up until a few months before it came out. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was simultaneously very slow moving and also very fast moving because there was just so much to deal with.
Right. Well, and again, I think that part of that is because there were so many ways to plug music into the game, right? I mean, you've got all the radio content and you can't, some of that came from the score itself, but a lot of it didn't, right? So, and I ended up asking you about one of the tracks. The first time I played through Oxenfree 2, I did not unlock the radio channel with the high school radio station advice line.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know why, I just didn't spend much time. So I didn't hear any of that the first playthrough. And then when I went through it the second time, I was like, oh my God, I love this music on this station so much. Well, so talk a little bit more about that, if you would, just, making these songs, as someone else in the game.
Yeah, this is fun because it starts in such a simple way and it's been going on so long with Night School, like beyond even the Oxenfrees. We've done that. We did this a lot for After Party, which is that the writers, the song names and the like band names are things that the writers make up and just put in the script. So the first thing that happened is we had, well, in Oxenfree 1 was Ren's band.
Yeah.
And so all I knew was I think Adam Hines had named it. Oh, his band's the Redheaded Bedwetters, and the song is called Baby Carrots. And that's what I started with. So that got made. Then you heard like 10 seconds of it. But even this is how weird and deep we can get. We did a collector's edition with I Am 8-Bit, and so one of the things we put in there was Ren's demo tape. So we're like, oh, well, here's where. So the only place that the full song existed was on a real cassette you got with this collector's edition. I don't know how many of those they even made. So yeah, so then, we did After Party and there's a bunch of band names dropped there. And so we made references in After Party to some kind of funny stuff. And then again, Maria's radio station, the band names and song names just showed up in the script. So I'm like, okay, well, what does Philly 68 sound like? And I was like, well, either they're a genuine, psych band from 1968, or they're people like in the 90s pretending Lenny Kravitz style to be from 1968. And the other one, The Mouse in the House, was like, oh, it's probably a dumb punk band.
The local dumbasses, right? Yeah.
And so I just write this, and then embarrassingly, local dumbasses. We needed a singer, and I'm here. So
that was you.
I think
I
that's.
wondered.
I don't know. I did that in like a half hour.
Oh God.
Punk rock out.
It's so great. It's so great. And then there's Morgan Cooley on 98.1, so not the high school. This is like the music from the Hearts of Space. Did you ever know that show? Did you ever encounter that show on public radio, Music from the Hearts of Space?
That's a nod. It's a nod.
Yeah.
So Morgan Cooley may not be me. And that's a in joke that's existed even well before uh well before Oxenfree was a thing. So yeah, people look online if you Google Morgan Cooley, he's got an entire album of
What?
yeah.
Oh God.
I think that's all I can
Okay.
say. Spoil it. You know, he's off in a cabin in the woods somewhere in Oregon, just making uh new age music. And in Oxenfree lore, he's Ren's uncle.
Ren's uncle, he says, I just want to give a shout out. I can't remember how he says it. He wants to say hi to his nephew, Ren, who's been on this, I've been on this journey. I can't remember how he says it, but he's something like, good luck on your musical journey, or it's just, they're all stoners. It's great. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, side effect of working on this game and working with Night School is we get to indulge these dumb little ideas.
It's the best. It's
Sure.
the best. I mean, you can spend so much time just standing there listening. And, for those who haven't played the game by radio, they're not like driving around in a car. She's carrying just a little tiny radio with her, a little portable radio. And she can just kind of scroll through it whenever she wants. And sometimes that's really important to the story. And sometimes it's just for the hell of it. And it's great. It's great. Super fun. Super fun.
We have kind of a philosophy developing at Night School, which is just, I've always just said vibe. Like we want the vibe there,
Yeah.
but it's video games, there's story or there's action, that people play for. But underlying everything, there should just be this feeling of like that the player wants to be there. I
Mm-hmm.
want to go hang out on the island. So yeah, I want to play again and get the other dialogue options or get the storyline. But also, it should mentally just feel like a vibe.
Yeah.
I don't even want it good because sometimes, like there are like horror games or action games that are very not feel good, but it's like, oh, it's a place I enjoy. I don't know if you've heard of Devil Daggers, but it's a very
Mm-mm.
I'm terrible at it. Extremely breakneck, like an average gameplay loop is like a minute, and it's horrifying, skulls flying around, kind of Doom-esque thing. But it's just like, oh, they nailed the vibe so perfectly. So it's definitely
Mm-hmm.
not happy. Like, oh, I can go there and relax, but it's something that's like almost addicting in a way. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just providing players with a place where it's like comfortable and they want to be.
Yeah.
Uh, and radio content really, really helps that. So even if it's not
Yes.
part of the story directly, yeah, you can go sit in the forest and listen to Morgan's radio station or follow along with Maria and like her life. And it's really, for me at least, just really enriches the world or parentage. You can find out more about parentage. You can learn to cook. There's a cooking show.
Yes, that's right.
And we just push to get as much of that created as possible.
Yeah.
Can play the whole game without ever interacting with any of that, but it just provides so much because you got the kind of the eye candy of the world. So
Mm-hmm.
we just something to match to really just flesh it all out.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, we were talking several minutes ago about how there really are some very beautiful, kind of calming musical moments in the score in varying places. Epsilon is one of the tracks. It's so gentle and beautiful. And Black Lake is a really good example too, and there are others. But I'd like to hear you talk about, kind of switching gears that way.
Yeah, we discussed a little already that the characters we're following are at a later point in their lives than the characters from.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things I was really, playing off of was we know more about what's on the other side of portals now, and I don't want to use the word spacey, but in general, you'll notice one compared to the other, there's a lot more use of reverb and space within the songs, and that is, for me at least, the writing is, it's kind of, as the time loop things become more prominent and we understand what the portals is, we've come unstuck, like the character's kind of unstuck in reality, and part of that is just a real simple way to do that is tons of reverb.
Yeah.
So everything's more spacey and floaty and like harder to understand or grasp immediately. And that's the same with like less overt or poppy like melodies and things, is just letting stuff have a little more space and have it be a little more ambiguous. And ultimately that was uh to intended to match that feeling of like, yeah, I'm really detached too, because there's the one, multiple scenes, but the one uh where Riley keeps waking up at the bus stop. And so
Yes.
that, where we intentionally, well, you're kind of hearing the normal song, but again, we're manipulating score as well, and it gets more worse and more distorted each time she hasn't fixed the loop. So yeah, it's that,
Wow.
and to the point where it bleeds into things that in our, from the player perspective, are like normal time, where Riley's just traversing the world with Jacob. It can still be more spacey because it's like that psychological vibe has kind of infected everything.
Yeah, yeah. I'm writing a note to ask you about an Oxenfree one thing in a bit that I forgot to write down. But there's a track called "Change the Station, Time Went,"
Mm-hmm.
and there's action happening here. What a fun opening to that track, because it's kind of just like if you got 12 different puzzles and put them together for the first, I don't know, 30, 45 seconds of that track. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, that is, spoiler alert, kind of. This is the repo for all the stuff that didn't get in the score. So, Oxenfree 1, we finished, and there was a bunch of extra music. So I was like, can I just put out a record of that stuff? So that's what Side Stories is this, with the exception of Beacon Bay, is the stuff that didn't make it into the game.
Okay.
So the channel changing happens in the game. So there's a scene on the beach, and the player can click, and you just keep changing, like the moon keeps changing, and then the soundtrack does as well. So that's where I stuck that stuff. But then time went, like the end of that is a piece that I loved that just didn't have a place in the actual score, with the exception of the that play there. So it's like, I'll throw in like a minute or two of that on the, as if, I don't know, the soundtrack's a different playthrough, and you do get to listen to that instead of moving away from it so quickly. So yeah,
Nice.
that's how that started, was just kind of like, hey, we'll throw some stuff in here for this specific scene. But then I realized, oh yeah, that's the garbage pile.
And how much, when you started working on Oxenfree 2, did you know, how much of the story did you know? Did you know that Riley was older? Did you know it was going to be Riley? Did you know certain spoilers about Riley? I mean, what kinds of things, what kinds of info did you have about how the story would be in 2 compared to 1 when you started?
Yeah, I think right away. I think, it
Okay.
was a pitch to us, to the development team, was like, this is the game, this is Riley, this is Jacob. We got new stuff. So one of the things was like, there's new ways to interact with people, the prime way being the walkie. And so this was a way
Right.
to, we know people who play night school games love conversations, and they love the branching and the naturalness. The walkie development was a way to uncouple that conversational stuff from necessarily having to be with someone the whole time. So if you're like, well, we have to
Right.
walk island, we're with Jacob, well, we're going to talk to Jacob for a long time. Or when you interact with other characters, this was a way to bring a lot more of that conversational dialogue style into almost anywhere in the game. So obviously you
Right.
do unlock characters you can talk to more or less, but it was a way to open that up. So even if a player is like, oh, I got a long way to walk, or I don't want to talk to Jacob, you could like click open the walkie and talk to someone else and help
Wow.
them, with their kind of side quest or just learn more about them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, all that stuff was pretty well solidified. And so I just had to think about how to meld that with kind of the pre-existing vibes we had set with Oxenfree 1 and yeah, go from there.
Yeah, yeah. There's a track called Lift. And this happens, you kind of go back to this peak on this island, and there's a whole situation that happens. And I really love the scene, and I love how Lift evolves, and it kind of goes through this kind of slow evolution initially, and then it kind of cuts out and it comes back with drums, and it's like, wow. And I love it. So talk to me about Lift.
Thank you. So this is one of those, it's a good one to ask about because it really shows how much of a winding path development can be. Is that was kind of made as like, well, if we have a scene that would fit this, that'd sure be cool. So the music existed before we had fit it in to the game. And then we had this idea at some point, I don't know, it's maybe even 3 years ago now, like, oh, we'll put, and this is prior to Netflix getting involved. We're like, yeah, we'll put some songs on Bandcamp. People will like that. We could, just give them something to enjoy while they wait. And that's like, it just needed a name. So that's why it was called Lift. I was like, for some reason, I think that was the temp title. And I was like, it sounds cool. It fits.
Yeah.
And then we found where it fit into the game and then rearranged the parts to make it work.
Okay.
And specifically with Oxenfree 2, the music's like, it's not hyper adaptive. Like I've done games where it's really, really tied to action and really changes it. But
Sure.
there's almost none of that in Oxenfree 1. In Oxenfree 2, we had the opportunity to really do that, to have it change depending on, what's happening at any given moment in the game. So yeah, got rearranged to more tightly follow, what's happening in the game. And yeah, that's kind of the story. And one of the fun things about, or one of the fortunate things about devs I've worked with is they've been really flexible with allowing music to not dictate 100% what might happen, but to say, oh, we should actually leave more space for this thing that we really enjoyed from the music. So is a little bit of back and forth, even in terms of them having the song and going, okay, well, this is the general flow, but we might want to leave more space here somehow, either with more dialogue or more traversal to get through, so the music can have some time to spool out. I know we talked previously about Jet, and that's where Jet is. I mean, there are entire sections of that game that were like, well, the piece of music's 10 minutes long, so we're gonna make that part of the game 10 minutes. And we didn't do as much of that with Oxenfree for sure, but it definitely had an influence on timing in some scenes.
Cool. To the Valley, this is one, and last year we talked about your scales and just putting in scales or portions of scales, and in To the Valley it's more like it's just like a tetrachord. I think you just go down to from 8 down to 5 or something, but I just love it. And To the Valley is another one that's just really beautiful and gentle, and I don't know, it's really lovely, and I'd love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, that was, I don't think it was this overt, but at some point that became for me like the song, like sort of. So one thing that was fascinating about Oxenfree was seeing how people reacted to this song or that song and gravitated to things over time. So assumptions about like, oh, people will really love this, and then something else kind of bubbles up. And this is all from looking at stats for like streaming and all that stuff.
Sure.
But it started with Epiphany Fields being an obvious front runner because it was like, oh, it's at the beginning of the game, everybody hears it, etc. But in the end, it became one of the most popular songs is The Beach 7 a.m., which is the credits song for
Yeah.
Oxenfree 1. And that became like the thing. So I wanted to do that for this game, and at least at the start, that's kind of what To the Valley was. It was like, this is the one that kind of is closest, the most close to me emotionally. It says the most about the game overall, and that's why it took that kind of prime position in
Yeah.
like, when we first, we start at the lighthouse, and that's Atwater Station, but then we move on from that because that's cold open. Now we need to define what Kamina is, and that's what To the Valley became. And again, kind of a more abstract title. I think that was a working title as well, but really unintentionally, almost accidentally reflects that feeling. Like you start in this town, but it's very small, and then from there, like you can go to this place, to that, and that's why there's so many things called To the. Is I wanted to kind of not even narrate the journey musically as much as just like point to its possibility. So it's like, oh, I'm going there. This is the start. Um, yeah. And so that was, I hope people like it. It's one of the most meaningful uh, for me in that sense, because unlike other things, like to the, I would say, yeah, like To the Island, I think is a good example of, yeah, taking something that already existed, but really knowing what the scene was and saying, this is what the scene needs and scoring to it. To the Valley kind of started even before that. It was
Oh,
like, this is
wow.
what define this place, and we'll find somewhere. And then we found the perfect place because it's the waking up at the bus stop, and then that happens repeatedly. We could kind of go back to it and kind of, remind players over and over, and hopefully that's the familiarity. Because with The Beach 7 a.m. from Oxenfree 1, like I said, it's only in the credits, but kind of not. I used that melody. I hinted at it wherever I could in the game. So you hear it in other locations uh, over and over. So I wouldn't go so far as to say like, oh, that's why people, we subconsciously like stuck it in people's brains. But I hope that's at least a little part of it. So if like you stand on the porch of the Adler house, the wind chimes are there, and if you just stand there long enough, it starts to play that melody. So yeah, just kind of this idea of like sneaking it in wherever we could.
Oh, good.
Think maybe, or maybe I don't know, but it's really fascinating that the end credits became one of the most kind of iconic pieces of music for players.
Yeah. Yeah. How is that shaken out for Oxenfree 2 then when you look at the stats? What are people gravitating toward? I have my favorite. We haven't talked about it yet, but I I mean I have a lot of favorites obviously, but I have one front runner and I'm just curious how it's played out so far.
Let's have a little fun and let's look at stats.
Let's look at
And so
stats.
I think it's too recent. So what most people don't know is you put out a collection of songs, whether it's an album or soundtrack. The first song always has the most plays, and then it just declines from there.
Yeah.
Again, even more amazing that the final song on the old soundtrack was one of the most popular. But
Yeah.
you can kind of watch. Yeah, and I think To the Valley is currently kind of a front runner in that respect. Um, the stars are on their side, which is kind of the score for the community center rotations. Um,
Yes.
doing okay. And then actually now that I look, we're kind of having a similar thing. So we do not have end credits music in this. It's just this is a whole another fun story, which is the end
Yeah.
credits real FM transmitter. I get obsessed with these things, and so I had to get a real FM transmitter, and so all the staticky sounds of music in the end credits is real broadcasts of Oxenfree and Oxenfree 2 music fading in and out. But
Cool.
before that's the scene with the box, so going through, and so that piece of music goes to the Pacific Northwest. Looks like it's people are enjoying that one too. Those are kinds of the ones I can point at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it was over years that we had these shifts. Like Epiphany Fields was just the one for a really long time, and then it slowly faded as other things like became more important for players.
Do you have a favorite off the second game before we dive deeper into the first at some point?
I think I can't pick favorites, but I guess the Valley. I think
To the Valley, yeah.
so that's fun. Those are the two like almost opposites for me.
What was
But
the
there's
other one you said?
like sometimes I've gotten better at this, but I'm one of those people who hates everything I've ever done. Uh, but I've gotten better at that, and I'm able to go, yeah, that's pretty good. Oh, that's all right. Less embarrassing moments, less personally embarrassing moments. You know what it is? I realize now that I'm scrolling through song titles. I
Yeah.
think Black that is one that is one of my favorites.
Black Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I don't know why.
Well, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful one. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, I think that's personal favorites, and then in terms of like what people are listening to, a little early, but those were the ones.
Okay. Yeah, it is early. It's only been out for what, 5 weeks or something, or 3 weeks. I don't even know. There's a handful of weeks it's been out. So yeah.
Yeah, 5 weeks, I think.
Yeah. Garland, when you go, that's a location in the game, and it's a ghost town, so it's creepy, and there was like a mining disaster, and so there's a graveyard, so it's super creepy. And one of the nights that I was just listening to the soundtrack independently of the game, I was just kind of like doing my, getting ready for bed routine, which, I don't know, I have all these things I do before I go to bed. And so I was doing all those, like getting the cat fresh water and doing the litter box and brushing all those things. And then I just like settled into bed with all the lights out, and I was still listening. And I'm just sitting in the dark, like playing some match 3 game or some stupid shit like that. And Garland comes on, and it was so creepy, just laying there in the dark, listening to that piece. And one of the things I liked about it is how, for as creepy as the game is, you don't really lean into that musically as often as you certainly could, right? I mean, and so to encounter a creepy tune like Garland and then this piccolo sound comes in and it's great. So talk to me about Garland.
So that is one that is more than I think anything on the soundtrack is more about that specific environment. So that was written once I knew what it was. I didn't know what they were going to do there. I just knew that Riley and Jacob were in Garland for a long time. So they walk that whole trestle. They go in the mine. They travel through time. So that was one where I really let it just go and just be the score for the area. But part of that was we're there so long and we're traveling through all these bits of time that I wanted pieces of score from other parts of both games to kind of come in. So that's where the flutes, I think, are a reference maybe to Days Past. I can't even remember where I stole them from, but I basically, stole stuff from other pieces of score, not to underpin this, but just to like be parts that fade in and out, kind of like the FM radio thing. Like, I don't know if people know this, but shortwave more like more distant radio broadcasts, they fade in and out depending on like the weather.
Yeah,
So
and
like
the landscape. Yep.
deflect or reflect more radio waves. So if you on a shortwave, it doesn't happen with FM, but with a shortwave, you can like tune in, and even if you're tuned in, it'll fade eventually. So you could go, I'm going to listen to this song. And like 5 minutes later, if you had just let it run, it's just static because that's been obscured by weather or whatever. So it's kind of that sense of having a strong base and then things kind of fading in and out. And then in turn, I felt that worked well with the environment because there's like a lot happens there, but nothing that I was really wanted to force a change musically. Until you end up in the church. And so that's, a completely different piece of music. So it was like, I can kind of score this whole thing. And then it actually rode like that for a long, and that's why it's so long too. It's a long place, you know. You can loop, but all this stuff will happen because the player's there long enough to hear it all. And then the only change that was made, and this was well into development, was we finally decided we wanted something different within the time tears. So when Riley and Jacob are like going into time tears to try to find out what's going on, like, oh, whoa, it's 1860 now. We wanted something, a little bit of a tonal change. So that's one thing that's in game that's not on the soundtrack, is this like quick switch, same tempo, same key, but just kind of a different vibe, just so we got this like more abrupt, like, oh wow, things are different, kind of.
Yeah.
So we crossfade to that really quickly, and then when you leave the time tear, it goes back to the Garland like main music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the very wordy reasons for why Garland exists and why it's so long.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, that's where I am right now in my second full playthrough of the second game. So kind of getting close to wrapping things up the second time here. Transmissions is probably my favorite. And one of the things I love about it is the first time I heard it and noticed it, I was over at Jacob's house and for the first time. And you do this thing in the upper voice, boo-doo-doo-da-da, boo-doo-doo-da-da, and you do that a few times, and then in my brain I was like, oh, please bring in the low octave. And then you did, and I was like, I'm done, I'm happy, this is like exactly what I wanted you to do, and it happened, and that just stuck with me, and now every time I hear that song, I just wait for that moment because I love that so much. So talk to me about the tune Transmissions.
If not the last, it was one of the last pieces to be written.
Oh, wow.
Because we needed vibe, and it was we aren't sure what the player's going to be doing at this point. So this will, at the bare minimum, it'll kind of fill in the areas where they're traversing the island, but there's no big dramatic turn. It might just be Riley and Jacob chatting. But also, I just use the term off-roading, but there's the critical path that the player can take to get through the whole game. And we do close off certain things to keep the narrative moving forwards. But there are times where the player, if they felt like it, could just walk around, listen to the radio.
Definitely have.
So that's one of the pieces that was just kind of written as like, well, what should it sound like when people are doing this? We still want it to be appropriate and to cover all the bases for, what could the player could possibly be doing in that from A to B time. And so it was kind of just trying to bracket that as best as we could. We did that there's different pieces of music depending on how far you are through the game. We have different pieces of music that will come in if the player's off-roading. So they're like, well, they're this way. Now they're going this way. They're supposed to turn on the transmitter. I don't know why. But if they're just having fun and cruising around, this is the music that is the fallback. But the way we made it work with the game was just the first one, for the first third of the game or quarter of the game is much more open and bright and like, hey, this is this new place. And then the next one's a little more darker and moody. And then Transmissions is kind of the final, like, all right, players are in it now. Even if they're off-roading, we still wanted that kind of that vibe, a little darker, a little more mysterious.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty sure it was the last thing that was.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I can't tell you in my first playthrough how much time I spent looking for the dog.
Oh.
It was all over that map looking for the dog. Yeah. And I off-roaded in this next playthrough for different reasons. But yeah, you just trying to find out what you can influence differently, right? You're like, oh, can I get that equipment sooner? Or, oh, can I, so you just, yeah, we wander.
Yeah, and this was a intentional change from what we learned from Oxenfree 1 is that we essentially you end up with hub areas. So it's an area that the player will have to go through multiple times, no matter what they're doing. In Oxenfree 1, we just weren't sophisticated enough. So there's one, kind of the field below, and I forget which piece of music plays, but the field below, Hardened Tower, the, there's multiple ways to intersect. So players were going through that a lot. And we realized, oh, they're just hearing like that piece of music over and
Oh,
over.
okay. Yeah.
We started out that way. We call them zones. And it's like, well, this is the zone music that'll play if nothing else is happening. But I made the conscious decision partway through. I was like, I don't want zone music anymore because I don't want that to happen. We have to have whatever's playing give the player a sense that they have progressed and the story has changed and they are further along. So that's what changed from the zone music concept to the progression music concept. Of course, it was way more complex than we initially thought, but I think we got it under control by the end. And then all Act 3. Once they go to the island, there's no off-roading. So we only had to the in Kamina and environs stuff, and then Act 3 begins, and we're like, okay, whew, we don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
But there's even, I think, before you trek to Edwards, there's even a point where it's a very video game trope, but Jacob's like, if there's anything else you want to do here, you should do it now, wink wink. And that's when I'm like, okay, well, this is the most likely time people will hear this piece of music. But you can't, it's possible to off-road earlier and trigger it earlier.
That might be when I was looking for the dog in the first playthrough. I'd have to remember. I have to think now because I can't remember when that all plays out. But yeah, so good. There's piano in I'm sure in more than just Copper Creek, but there's a track called Copper Creek, and there's this little melody it plays, and again, just such simple little things that I really loved. So talk to me about the track Copper Creek.
Well, that's at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's not progression music, but it was written for or is used for like, well, they're going from A to B, but there's not like the thing or the turning point that it really has to reflect. So yeah, that was one of the first ones. It was like, well, we kind of need like traveling music, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that's how that started. Was very simple. Like, don't want to be too moody. Don't want to impress upon the character. Super strong directive. We'll do that pretty much immediately after. Like once they get to the summit and do the first transmitter stuff, that's when it gets heavier. But up until then, it's like Jacob and Riley are kind of getting to know each other. So I guess in a way it reflects that. It's like, yeah, we're just kind of getting to know these people, getting to know this island. Nothing's too heavy. Just let it ride. Yeah. And those are how all excuse me, almost all of this starts, is not scoring a specific scene, but we're always first pass is like painting vibe, either for specific things like this, or just like, I don't know, we're gonna have some more action. So that's where lift or no exit come from. Is oh, these will be intentional, but I don't know what the scene is yet.
Yeah.
Or once mentioned earlier, once we get there, then I chop it up and like reconfigure it so it fits in there. But yeah, this is much more easier and less interactive because it is like we just got to establish this mood for these two characters who just met, and simultaneously, not lead the player too much, but also just set the tone.
Yeah. There's a track called Atalanta Third, and there are Atalanta tracks in the first as well. Was Atalanta Third related to anything in the first game. I kind of became hip to that a little late, so I didn't get a chance to confirm it. But I loved Atalanta Third.
Yeah, so Argonaut, again, this is back to the World War II missions. Argonaut Atalanta was on Oxenfree 1, I believe, and then Argonaut. And in using that for the scene, the stuff that became Atalanta Third was kind of like mixed in there.
Okay.
And everybody's like, hey, we love this. And I believe in here, some of it's just straight up. Hold on. I'm going to listen and do a little cheat here. So that repeating is just a chop of some reverb or something from Argonaut Atalanta that we were using as like tone, but then there was a scene that happened within that overall Argonaut vibe. I was like, oh shit, now I gotta write something. And so this is Riley's interactions with her father, which is one of the more emotional like scenes. So I was like, well, I can't just have this tape loop playing. I have to write something. So on top of that, I went back, and this is, again, I'm very good at archiving. I had the original synth sound, and luckily it was some virtual thing. It wasn't something I'd recorded and forgotten. So I got to go back to that original kind of synth pad sound and then rewrite and then put a little melody on top just to like take something that was more just like not underscore, but like, just kind of more vibe and really push it intentionally to like back up the sentimentalness of that. Really bittersweet, I think, is the way to put it. It's like, it's really like poignant in some ways. It's really heartbreaking in others, and was to try to make something that like supported that. But from something that was specifically not pushing a mood before. So Atalanta Third is this is how things get named. The third iteration of that music. And I think at a point by then I was like, oh shit, I've really beat this to death. But then on those scenes was like, I love this. This is my favorite piece of music from the whole thing. So was going back to that and then eventually carving something out that really worked and reflected mood. So this is one that is definitely more tightly scored to the scene, and then was able to kind of work back out of that into the more kind of tonal stuff.